I want you to imagine a road trip.
Oh, but banish any thought of a fun weekend getaway.
Right, yeah, no carefully curated playlists or a cooler full of snacks in the back seat here. Instead, I want you to picture the American landscape in the late 1930s.
It's a very different vibe.
Completely. Imagine the sky literally turning black at noon, just choked with millions of tons of topsoil. You're packing every single worldly possession you own into a rickety, overloaded Hudson Super 6 truck.
Just cramming your whole life into it.
Exactly. You are leaving the only home you've ever known, pulling onto Route 66 and heading west. And you aren't going on vacation. You are fleeing out of sheer, absolute desperation.
Migrating down that blistering highway alongside hundreds of thousands of other people just like you.
You're all chasing a rumor of work and basically just praying for basic survival. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you here with us.
We really are.
Our mission today is to explore why a story about the Great Depression and the catastrophic Dust Bowl, a story published nearly a century ago, remains shockingly, almost uncomfortably relevant right now.
And even more surprisingly, we're going to look at why taking this journey through the spoken word might actually be the absolute best, most ultimate way to experience it.
Yeah, it's wild.
It truly is a completely different way to encounter a monumental piece of literature. To guide our discussion today, we are pulling from a deeply fascinating piece of analysis titled Sonic Dust.
Sonic Dust, great title.
Right. And the source specifically deconstructs the audiobook experience of John Steinbeck's 1939 classic, The Grapes of Wrath. It is an exploration that forces us to look at how a change in medium, so moving from ink on a physical page to the warmth and grit of a human voice, can entirely transform how we absorb history, how we process empathy, and understand systemic collapse.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
to understand why this audio analysis is so glowing, we really have to quickly set the scene of the story itself.
Just laying that narrative foundation.
Yeah, exactly. Based on the narrative foundation we are looking at. We drop right into the dusty, sun-baked life of Tom Joad. He's just been paroled from state prison and is making his way back home through the Oklahoma landscape.
He's probably expecting, a familiar home-cooked meal, his own bed.
Right, only to arrive and find his family's farmhouse totally deserted, pushed off their foundation, and the family is entirely displaced.
And the culprits aren't just the apocalyptic weather of the Dust Bowl.
No, though that ecological disaster is obviously the backdrop. The real forces driving them out are relentless bank foreclosures and the sudden, unstoppable rise of mechanized farming,
Yeah, tractors are literally plowing through tenant farms.
erasing decades of human history in a single afternoon.
Yeah.
The land is gone, the livelihood is gone, and the Joad family is essentially homeless.
What's fascinating here is that this specific inciting incident is not just a localized tragedy.
It's way bigger than that.
Exactly. It is the catalyst for a massive, epic-defining journey. The Joad family crams their entire existence, generations of lives, a few meager possessions, and an overwhelming amount of anxiety onto a single truck.
And they join this massive, desperate migration of tenant farmers pouring out of the Midwest.
They point the hood of that truck toward California, gripping tightly to these handbills that promise endless fruit to pick and good wages to earn.
Just holding on to this desperate hope.
Right, a hope that they will find work, maintain some dignity, and ultimately just survive. But as they push westward, they're met with hostility, starvation-level wages, and just a constant barrage of broken promises.
Which is brutal.
It is. And the analysis we are exploring emphasizes that this goes far beyond a simple family drama. The source notes that it uses the Joads as a focal point to expand outward into a sweeping social commentary.
It's fundamentally a story about raw capitalism, severe labor injustice, and the collective struggle of ordinary people caught in the gears of a system that views them as entirely expendable.
Which brings us to the core argument of this sonic dust analysis.
Yeah, and this is something that completely shifted how I view classic literature. The argument is that Steinbeck's Crows feels like it was biologically engineered to be heard.
Not just read silently in a quiet room.
Right, but spoken aloud, with breath and cadence. There is a really compelling distinction made here regarding the cognitive load of reading versus listening.
Oh, the cognitive load difference is huge.
When you sit down with a heavy, physical copy of a historical text, the experience is often highly analytical. You are tackling a piece of literature, and your brain is working overtime just to process the mechanics of the writing.
But the audio experience is described as naturally, effortlessly immersive. It carries a completely different emotional weight.
That cognitive load you mentioned is the absolute key to understanding this medium shift.
Think about the mechanics of reading text on a page, especially text written with heavy, era-specific regional
Oh
dialects.
yeah, the phonetic spelling.
Exactly. The author uses phonetic spelling, dropped consonants, and just a sea of apostrophes to convey an Oklahoma drawl. When your eyes hit those words, your brain literally has to pause.
You have to sound it out.
You have to sound out the phonetics, consciously translating those visual symbols into the imagined speech pattern of a 1930s migrant farmer.
It takes so much work.
It requires a significant amount of mental bandwidth, and frankly, that decoding process acts as an emotional barrier.
That makes so much sense.
You are so busy trying to figure out what the word is supposed to sound like that you can easily miss the heartbreak or the exhaustion buried in the sentence. It pulls you out of the narrative flow.
It turns a deeply human moment into a linguistic puzzle. You are doing a decoding exercise instead of just feeling the story.
And that is exactly where a masterful vocal performance changes the entire landscape. When you listen to an acclaimed narration, especially one delivered by an experienced dramatic actor who understands the rhythm of the era, that barrier completely vanishes
Because your brain skips the decoding process entirely.
and goes straight to empathy. The actor brings a raw, unpolished authenticity to the dialogue. The regional dialect of the Joad family suddenly stops being a textual obstacle and becomes a living, breathing, natural rhythm. It just flows.
The moments of profound loss, the sharp spikes of desperate anger.
The quiet, exhausted moments of unity around a roadside fire, they hit you with a visceral force when you hear the subtle crack, the exhaustion, or the warmth in a human voice.
You aren't just reading a historical account of their pain. You are sitting in the dirt with them, hearing it firsthand.
Here's where it gets really interesting, at least for me, regarding how the audio format changes the actual structure of the experience.
Oh, the rhythmic structure part.
Yes.
Yeah.
The analysis dives deep into the rhythmic structure of the novel. Steinbeck didn't just write a conventional, straightforward narrative from point A to point B.
He deliberately alternates.
He alternates between traditional narrative chapters that follow the Joad family's specific struggles and these highly poetic, almost documentary-style interlude chapters.
These interludes zoom way out, leaving the Joads behind to look at the macro-level forces of the entire migration.
And when experienced in audio, this structural contrast feels incredibly cinematic.
It is a brilliant technique. Steinbeck is playing with perspective and scale, forcing the audience to understand that the Joads are just one microscopic drop in a massive tidal wave of human displacement.
If we think of it like a piece of modern filmmaking, the chapters with the Joads are like these super tight, intimate, handheld close-ups.
You are right there in the claustrophobic truck cab with Tom.
You can almost smell the engine oil and the sweat.
You are sitting right at the campfire, listening to them worry about the next meal.
But then the audio shifts to an interlude chapter, and it is as if the director suddenly cuts to a massive, sweeping drone shot high above the American West.
You are suddenly looking at a montage of physical dust storms rolling like black mountains across the plains.
You are hearing about a determined turtle slowly crossing a sun-baked highway.
Which is a famous, highly symbolic moment that sets the thematic tone.
Right. You are looking at the vast, sprawling roadside camps and the incredibly crowded labor fields where thousands of people are competing for a handful of jobs.
Having these contrasting perspectives spoken aloud makes the atmosphere feel completely lived in. You are hearing history unfold around you in a 360-degree sensory way, rather than just tracking the plot points of one fictional family.
That shift in perspective is what elevates the story from a novel to an experience. However, stepping into an experience of this magnitude requires a certain level of preparation.
Yeah, we should definitely warn them.
The analysis is very clear about the sheer gravity of this undertaking. Anyone who tackles a masterpiece from the 1930s knows they aren't in for a lighthearted romp, but the audio format demands a specific type of literary stamina.
We're looking at unabridged runtimes that generally stretch from 18 to 22 hours long.
That is an enormous investment of your time and emotional energy.
I have to be honest, when I saw that this unabridged experience is up to 22 hours long, my first genuine thought was, do I really want to spend an entire day and a half of my life listening to people slowly starve and lose everything?
It sounds absolutely exhausting.
It really does. I can see why someone might hesitate to press play on that.
That hesitation is completely valid, and it is a reaction the source material actually acknowledges. You are immersing yourself in heavy, relentless themes of poverty, severe exploitation, and systemic injustice for almost a full day.
You were sitting in the passenger seat with the anger, the indignity, and the profound despair of people who have had their entire world ripped away from them.
Furthermore, those cinematic interlude chapters we were just praising for their wide-angle perspective can sometimes challenge modern attention spans.
Oh, for sure. If you are deeply invested in finding out how Tom Joad gets out of a dangerous situation, suddenly zooming out to listen to a 20-minute documentary-style chapter about the broader economic forces of used car salesmen exploiting migrants might test your patience.
Exactly. Because of this heavy emotional and pacing toll, the recommendation is to absorb this journey in parts or segments.
You need to give yourself space to process the weight of what you are hearing.
But the payoff for that literary stamina is immense. The narrative current is incredibly strong, and the empathy it builds makes the exhaustion entirely worth it.
So what does this all mean? Why are we breaking down a 20-hour, emotionally draining audio experience about the 1930s Dust Bowl?
Why should you, listening to us right now, care about this nearly a century after the ink dried on the first edition?
Exactly. When you spend that much time immersed in the struggles of a displaced family, you start to pick up on the foundational pillars of how human beings survive the unthinkable.
The analysis highlights 4 major themes that form the bedrock of the novel and points out how the spoken word specifically amplifies the power of each one.
Instead of just looking at these as abstract concepts, let's look at how they actually play out in the dirt and the dust of Route 66.
The emotional core of that survival really begins with the concept of human dignity. And in the story, that dignity is entirely anchored by the character of Ma Joad. What strikes me about the audio analysis of her character is how it redefines what dignity looks like in a crisis.
It isn't loud, it isn't boastful, and it certainly isn't about pride or status.
In the face of losing your ancestral home and watching your children go hungry on the side of the road, dignity is simply the raw, unyielding willpower to keep your family from splintering apart.
The audio format highlights this beautifully. Hearing that quiet strength, that stubborn refusal to break, spoken aloud by a skilled narrator, makes her resolve feel incredibly grounded. She becomes the gravitational center of the family.
And that quiet dignity is constantly, violently colliding with the second major theme, which is economic injustice.
We talked earlier about the bank foreclosures and the mechanized farming that pushed them out, but the injustice doesn't stop when they hit the road.
It actually gets much worse.
The anger and the despair of these displaced farmers feel shockingly visceral when you hear them spoken aloud. We are not dealing with abstract economic theories about supply and demand.
We are dealing with devastating broken promises. These families were handed flyers telling them California was a paradise of endless work and fair wages.
They sacrificed everything to cross a desert, only to arrive and find that those flyers were bait.
The corporate farms purposely invited far more workers than they needed to drive wages down to starvation levels. They discover they are entirely expendable.
When you hear a narrator deliver that crushing realization, when you hear the spoken anger of a man realizing his children will starve no matter how hard he is willing to work, it hits you squarely in the chest. It bridges a 90-year gap in an instant.
Which forces a fundamental necessary change in how these characters view themselves and the world around them, leading into perhaps the most important philosophical theme of the journey.
The battle between community and individualism.
Yes. Survival in this brutal landscape demands a complete rewiring of human instinct. Steinbeck makes a powerful argument that survival depends strictly on unity, not isolation.
Through the course of the journey, we witness a profound moral awakening.
The characters are forced to shift their mindset from a desperate I mentality, where they're only concerned with protecting their own immediate kin, fighting over scraps, to a broader we mentality.
They have to recognize that every single displaced person in those massive roadside camps is in the exact same boat.
If they stay isolated, they die. If they unionize their empathy, they might just survive.
That shift from I to we is the beating heart of the story. And that shared collective survival is exactly where the fourth theme comes in: hope amid despair.
It would be easy to look at a 22-hour story of poverty and assume it is just an exercise in misery.
But the audio experience reveals profound, uplifting moments of shared humanity. Even in the absolute darkest, most bleak camp scenes, where the rain is turning the ground to mud and the food is gone, you find people sharing what incredibly little they have.
You find strangers stepping in to comfort a grieving mother.
You find connection. That resilience, that refusal to let the spark of humanity be extinguished by economic crushing is what makes the journey beautiful, rather than just tragic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is precisely why this deep dive into the audio format reveals a story of urgent modern importance.
We are discussing a book published in 1939 about the ecological disaster of the Dust Bowl.
A look closely at the thematic pillars we just explored based on the source material. The analysis outlines how the book deals with severe wealth inequality.
It tackles blatant labor exploitation and the gig economy.
It addresses mass migration crises driven by environmental changes and economic collapse.
And it highlights systemic injustice where the law protects massive corporations while punishing the impoverished individual.
You could take that exact list of themes, change the date, and you have the front page of almost any major news outlet right now.
The context has shifted, the clothes are different, and the technology has evolved. But the fundamental friction between human dignity and systemic profit has not changed one bit.
That is why the experience of listening to this text is described as urgently timeless. It doesn't feel like a dusty museum piece preserved under glass.
It feels like a piercing, relevant commentary on the world we are navigating right this very second.
And for those who decide to take on this 22-hour challenge, the journey is packed with moments that gain incredible, unforgettable emotional gravity through a strong vocal performance.
The analysis specifically teases Tom Joad's evolving philosophy.
Yeah.
You get to intimately listen as his worldview shifts from a hardened, self-serving ex-convict to a man who truly understands the power of the collective we.
You get to hear the intense, complicated dynamics of the camp community scenes play out almost like a stage play in your ears.
And of course, there's the legendary, highly debated final scene of the novel.
It is an ending that leaves people stunned, arguing and reflecting, and experiencing it through the raw emotion of an audiobook narrator elevates it to an entirely new level of impact.
The fact that literary scholars and everyday readers are still fiercely debating the meaning of that final scene almost a century later tells you everything you need to know about the enduring, provocative nature of Steinbeck's work.
Absolutely. The reviewer we pulled this analysis from clearly felt the sheer weight of that impact, awarding the audiobook experience a massive 9.5 out of 10 rating.
They summed up the 22-hour undertaking with 3 simple, powerful words. Powerful. Emotional. Unforgettable.
It stands as a remarkable testament to both the indestructible quality of the original writing and the unique power of vocal performance to shatter the distance of time, breathing vital new life into a classic text.
So, to summarize our deep dive today for you, The Grapes of Wrath is far more than a historical fiction about one family from Oklahoma getting dusty on Route 66.
It is a massive, sweeping epic about the American landscape and a profound examination of humanity operating under immense, crushing pressure.
By choosing to step into this world through the audiobook format, bypassing the cognitive load of reading the dialect, what might initially look like a daunting historical text completely transforms.
It becomes an urgent, deeply emotional, and unforgettable journey.
You aren't just reading about history. You are hearing the exhaustion in their voices. You are feeling the grit of the dust storms, and you are living the struggle alongside the characters.
This raises an important question, and it is something I think is well worth carrying with you long after you finish listening to us today.
We spent a lot of time discussing the Joad's moral awakening.
That profound, hard-won realization that survival requires completely abandoning an I mentality in favor of a collective we mentality when faced with total economic and environmental collapse.
As you go about your day today, look closely at our modern landscape. We live in a highly individualized, digitally isolated society.
We pride ourselves on ultimate independence, building our own bubbles, and relying on our own self-sufficiency.
But if an economic or environmental crisis forced you out of your home and onto the road tomorrow with nothing but what you could carry in your hands, who would make up your we?
Beyond the walls of your own house and your immediate family, who is truly in your community?
What does collective, shared survival actually look like for us in the digitally fractured 21st century?
That is an incredible, slightly unsettling thought to end on. It really forces you to evaluate the strength of the invisible threads connecting you to the people around you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this exploration into the power of the spoken word and the enduring relevance of a 1930s classic has inspired you to reconsider how you experience literature. Keep seeking out great stories, keep asking the big questions about your own community, and we will catch you next time.